Oh, good evening and welcome to Cadw Cymru revision sessions. This is the third session that you've had looking at A-level English, and this session will focus on English Literature Unit 4 Section A, so the Shakespeare part of the paper, and the extract is what we're focusing on today. So this will be presented by myself, Mrs Cathy Davis. I teach in Ysgol Gyfun Gymraeg Rhywyddin, and the session will last around 45 minutes. And here I will attempt to go through the relevant content, link the subject, and as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with email. The session itself will be recorded and it will be uploaded on the Cadw Cymru area of the e-sgol website. Right, so if we look at the session outline for this evening, so we're looking at Section A. We'll have an overview. We'll have a quick look at what the examiners say, the commentary that they have given from 2019, so the last time the exam was actually physically sat in person, obviously pre-pandemic. We'll be looking at the skills that are required to analyse a drama text as well, okay? So just to familiarise yourself with the first section, so Section A of the paper, next week we'll be looking at the second section, so Section B. So looking at a Shakespearean extract. So in Section A, the WJC state that they will reward well-informed and well-organised responses. The responses need to be creatively engaged, and they also need to make use of appropriate terminology. So looking at satisfying the AO1 part of the assessment criteria. It also states that candidates will need to demonstrate their analytical skills as they explore Shakespeare's use of language, imagery and literary devices. Here we've got an overview of how the marks are awarded. So you've got AO1 is worth 15 and then AO2 is double that, okay, so you've got 30, so a total of 45 is available to you on the Section A part of this paper. And ideally, I would advise you to spend around 40 to 45 minutes on this section as well, okay? Anything over 45 minutes, and I think that you may end up undoing some of the good work that you've done as well, okay? If we move on then to the instructions that are on the front of your paper, okay? So answer one question, Section A, and you also need to answer one question from the second section, so Section B. The one, like I said, we'll be going over next week. So you must make sure that you're looking at the same Shakespeare play for both Section A and Section B, and you write your answers in the given answer booklets. So Section A carries 45 marks and Section B carries 75 marks. So the number of marks is given in brackets at the end of each question. And again, similarly here to what I said, so around 45 minutes on Section A and now around 50 minutes on Section B. Okay, and again, and this is a message that's being emphasised quite a lot by WJC, is that assessment will take into account the quality of written communication using your answers. It's not all about the quantity and how much that you manage to write, okay? So the examiner commentary here, okay, so WJC in 2019, they noted their concerns about the quality of written expression at this level. So, you know, your A-level candidates, you've chosen the subject at A-level, and the quality and the level that's been expected is, in their view, falling a little bit short at times. They've stated the candidates write very long one sentence paragraph, really risk losing their focus, a trend away from an academic style and register to something which is more a little bit kind of colloquial and chatty and informal. And that is something that we need to be really, really mindful of. The example that I give you later on in this presentation shows kind of the academic style and the academic register that is needed, okay, in order to be reaching those top bands. Many responses to the Shakespeare extract featured writing out large chunks of the extract for textual support instead of using brief quotations, and then obviously then as a result the quality of the discussion or the commentary was obviously greatly reduced because it lacks the focus and the detail and the close analysis, okay? Also WJC stated that too many candidate scripts featured page after page of random comments, and echoing that idea of examiners are not impressed by quantity but by quality. That's something that we really need to be careful of and mindful of, okay? So here you've got an extract from the play Hamlet. So the question there, with close reference to language and imagery at this point, in this extract, analyse how Shakespeare presents Hamlet at this point in the play. Okay, so opens here, you've got this a conversation between Hamlet and Guildenstern and Rosencrantz. Okay, so two of Hamlet's apparent close friends, should we say. It always tells you in the bottom right corner, as you can see here, where this scene comes from. Okay, so you'll be able to place in some sort of context yourselves then. Okay, we'll have a quick think about the sort of things that appear here. If you have a read through it, we won't read through it all together, but what you might notice straight away is the constant use of question marks. Okay, one thing that is quite obvious just to kind of spot straight away. And we got a sense of kind of them interrogating one another. Okay, but what Hamlet is trying to do here is he's trying to find out from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern what their intentions are, because he's really suspicious of the pair and believes that they are acting as spies for Claudius. Okay, when asked about kind of the way he's been kind of experiencing the feelings he's been experiencing and how he's been behaving himself, Hamlet describes it as this kind of melancholy, and he tries to sort of persuade Rosencrantz and Guildenstern that this is a genuine state, so that they will then go back and report this to Claudius. And Shakespeare seems to be quite ambiguous at this point in the play, and he's probably in being quite ambiguous and leaving it kind of like on a bit of it, or leaving things on tenterhooks a little bit. He's trying to build up the dramatic tension in this scene. Okay, we can see here that the whole response, the whole extract, is written in prose and not in blank verse. Okay, so we could look at the impact of this quite possibly. We could maybe look at the fact that it maybe lightens the tone of the exchange. You could suggest that perhaps, despite the sort of seriousness of this situation, the tone that's being used by Hamlet here is quite playful, and that's echoed sort of towards the end of the speech here, where he says, "Man delights not me, no, nor woman either, though by your smiling you seem to say so." So there is a sense of sort of like, here we look at the tone. So types of things that you could pick up on. Here's the ideas that are being expressed. So like I said, look at the fact it's written in prose is one thing you could look at. The kind of rhythm maybe of the exchanges, how it's quite quick, the questioning from and the interrogation from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Okay, so the interrogation. We get a sense that through some of the language choices that he makes, he says, "Be even and direct with me," Hamlet does to them. Okay, so the "be even and direct with me," we get a sense of his authority here. Okay, and his assertive nature, quite possibly you could look at, and obviously his authority as prince is being shown. Okay, in his assertive language. We also get some language choices that link to this idea of deception. So he says things like secrecy, for example, craft he uses, confession he uses. Okay, so when you're looking at language, zoom in a little bit more and look at the idea of what type of language. So maybe the language that links to deception, you could maybe state as well. Okay, and then when we look at the rhetorical style of Hamlet's description of his kind of melancholy, the adjectives and phrases that are used, so goodly, sterile, excellent, brave, you know, these all show this element of him trying to create a sense of pathos with the audience as well. Okay, so they're the types of things you could be picking up on in this when looking at this particular extract. We'll quickly look then at an extract from a different play, so looking at King Lear. Again, same sort of wording with close reference language and imagery in the extract, and like Shakespeare's presentation of Lear at this point in the play. Okay, so clear character focus, Okay. Types of things you may want to look at is that in this particular part, again, it tells you Act 4, Scene 6, okay? So at this point, okay, Lear is at the kind of peak of his madness at this point in the play. He's ranting and he's preaching at this point, okay, about the ideas of injustice and corruption, okay? So what you'd maybe look at to show the idea of his ranting and his raving is the weighting of speech. Okay, so the speech weighting or the balance, okay, that's being shown. Okay, so if you look at the volume of speech here that Lear's got, okay, so he's the one that's dominating the speech here. All right, so if you look at things like that, that might be quite useful. Okay, you've got obviously Gloucester's evident distress at sort of Lear's decline, and remembering obviously the blind Gloucester's distress at Lear's decline. Edgar's presence, again, you've got the idea of them trying to reinforce the pathos of the scene for the audience. Got a real sense of sympathy with the poor being shown, and new recognition of the corrupt power of wealth in Lear's imagined exchanges with authority figures. And you get a sense that the sort of quite philosophical ideas at the end of the extract, where we've got this quieter here, looking at like his fortune, an idea of being patient and smelling the air. Okay, we get a sense that there's a more reflective tone being shown here. Okay, so looking at the tone being quite reflective. So it differs, it quietens a little towards the end. Okay. When it comes to looking at kind of the language analysis in a bit more depth, the types of things you could pick up on here is the mixture of prose and blank verse in his speech. And it shows that it shifts kind of between like madness, and it also shifts between this sense of sort of deep thinking. Okay. You've got, again, the idea of themes being shown of corruption, hypocrisy, injustice, and authority figures. You've got the phrases that are being used here as well. You've got things like rascal, beadle, scurvy, politician, okay, to kind of really focus on that idea of, so here you got the scurvy politician, okay, so focusing on that idea of corruption and things being tainted, and again, the idea of vices that are shown here as well, okay. You've got obviously the theme and imagery of sight to illustrate understanding and insight, okay, so with the blind Gloucester, the constant use of questions and exclamations that's used throughout the course of this is really important. You'd have to pick up on the punctuation, the repeated punctuation here, okay? So the questioning and the exclaiming throughout Lear's speech really adds to the nature of this delivery, okay? And it shows that, you know, there's this desire to kind of like understand about issues and things like injustice. You've got the imagery that's been used, that quite kind of juxtaposed imagery, the contrasting imagery of wealth and poverty, where he comments on the plate sin with gold and armed it in rags. So you can have a look at that as well. So lots of different aspects you could look at in this particular section. You could possibly also look at kind of the lyrical quality at the end of the extract, where he talks, there's Lear, about this idea of preaching, okay. We got a sense that he seems quite wise, and there's a sense of acceptance towards the end as well, okay. So they're the sort of things that you may want to consider, okay. And there's just a reminder for you, those of you who may be unfamiliar. Again, like I said, these are all available to print and to download, and are saved on the Cadwell Cymru area. So there's the mark scheme for this particular part of the paper as well. So looking at the split again, so 15 and 30 for your AO2. Just a reminder, obviously we're looking at the WJC mark scheme here. Just a reminder that there are some nice resources linked to blended learning. We have discussed some of them earlier in some of the parts, some of the sessions, but don't forget about those as well. So today what we're going to be focusing on mainly is the way in which playwrights use setting, the way that they use dramatic irony, stagecraft, how to make a play powerful and dramatic, and then how characters are portrayed. So setting is where and when a story or a scene takes place. It can be real, it can be imagined, and similarly the when can be a real time or period, it can be past or present. It could link to landscape, architecture, social context, weather. Okay, setting is also sometimes referred to as the scene, or it could be referred to as a sense of place. And not just being kind of a backdrop for a story, it often kind of shapes the story's kind of main events and motivates the characters to act as they do. Works of literature have multiple settings, and it definitely is important to note how plot developments and character developments correspond to changes in the setting. So things like the physical location you can look at, the time, so when does it take place, is it in the past, future, present, things about kind of the social setting, and change as well that's shown throughout the course of it. Okay, here then we're looking at Hamlet, for example. So in literature, setting refers to various locations where the story's action unfolds. Can often be as important as the plot and the characters themselves. So Hamlet's primary setting is at Elsinore Castle, but the play is also set at a pivotal moment in history as we see the medieval and the Renaissance period sort of transition into the more modern era. So Hamlet, we know, is a young man who wants to resume his life studying with his friends at university in Wittenberg, Germany. His mother, Gertrude, kind of manages to make him feel guilty enough to persuade him and encourage him to stay at Elsinore for a while. And he's got no choice but to remember who he is. Okay, he's not just a prince, but he's also subject to King Claudius, who he's required to serve, essentially. Okay, Elsinore is a town on the eastern coast of Denmark, was a really important military location, was a stronghold from which the King of Denmark controlled quite a narrow stretch of sea. It's a fortress that kind of has stood in the town since the Middle Ages. So using kind of the sort of historical link you could look at, okay? The castle that Elsinore is based on was the largest of its kind in Renaissance Europe, okay, and was made famous by Hamlet, okay. Similar to the story associated to it, okay, Frederick, the king who is in the castle, okay, he was visited, like Claudius, by a group of travelling actors. So we get a sense that Hamlet's story is not just sort of come across by chance, okay. There's a lot of kind of basis on what happens, okay. It stems from actual historical fact that Shakespeare sort of picks up on, okay. The whole play takes place inside Elsinore's castle, except for Act 5, Scene 1, which takes place just outside or possibly in the grounds of the castle, as does the soliloquy of Act 4, Scene 4, just kind of outside on a plain in Denmark, okay. But the majority of it takes place in Elsinore's castle or in its grounds. So we get a sense of the importance of setting them through that, okay. Dramatic irony then, okay, so it's where a situation in which the reader knows something about kind of the present or future circumstances the character doesn't know. So we know, for example, in Macbeth that when Duncan's murdered body is found, Macbeth behaves as though he's angry with the supposed murderers, but the audience knows that he is in fact the murderer himself, okay, and that's what dramatic irony is. So we looked at King Lear earlier, so King Lear's rejection of his daughter Cordelia's love starts this sort of unfortunate chain of events leading to kind of his tragic downfall as a king, as Lear chooses other daughters, Goneril and Regan, who kind of profess their love for him for their own kind of personal gain, okay? The reason this is ironic is because Lear's daughter Cordelia, the one who truly did love and care for him, was rejected by him, and he chose kind of the fake daughters over her. The two daughters Lear rewards for flattering him betray him entirely, whilst the other, who refused to flatter him, is the one who truly loves him, remains faithful, and she's the one that comes to his aid, okay? The other two, so Goneril and Regan, they gain his wealth and they treat him really sort of poorly. And then you've got the only characters from the start. So you've got Cordelia, Kent and Lear's Fool, the only characters in the play that from the start kind of possess this sort of goodness and vision to recognise evil, okay? And Shakespeare uses this throughout the play, this juxtaposition of blindness and sight among the play's characters in order to kind of create this sense of dramatic irony. So Lear, Gloucester and Edgar kind of remain blind for almost the entire play, so unaware of Regan and Goneril and Edmund's sort of wicked motives, and that's what the irony is in that play in particular, okay? Definitely one of the most effective kind of tools that a dramatist can use in order to kind of enhance the emotional appeal of the story and to create the sense of suspense as well. Authors also use the device to create unusual meanings in the speeches of the characters. They use it as a tool to definitely generate the sense of curiosity as well. And we learn as an audience that we become more integrated and engaged in what's going on as we view the play as it unfolds. So aspects such as stagecraft then, so the technical aspect of theatre and film and video production, obviously we've got, but also we've got to be considering sort of the different versions of the plays that we see. So things like lighting that we could consider. Obviously with a lot of the Shakespearean plays, we've got kind of RSC versions, you've got the NT Live versions, you've got different directors' takes on scenes. So make sure that you're able to consider how different directors and kind of debate how different directors have taken a given scene and made it their own, and think about maybe the reasoning behind it. So you've got things like stage dynamics, which kind of create a scenic kind of movement and this visual connection and kind of emotional connection that's established with the audience as well, okay, with regards to stagecraft. So lighting is really important. It definitely allows for us to kind of look at some sort of dramatic relevance when it comes to the choices that are made. As you know, the first impression that we get of a character is often given by the costume or the dress that the actor wears. Okay, so costumes are a style of dress pertaining to a nation, a class, a particular period of personality. So we're able to gauge a lot about a character before they even speak from what they're wearing, the colours that they're wearing, quite possibly, because often in certain eras the colours have a dramatic impact as well. Things like theatrical properties, so commonly referred to as props, include kind of things like furnishing, set dressing, and equipment that sort of doesn't fall under the category of scenery. And then the props then used by the actors are known as hand props. So if you've got a character or an actor in your play that constantly carries the same thing or has things kept in their costume, they would be referred to as personal props. And then obviously the use of sound, really important, and it's all about what's audible to the audience and what the actors and what the director is able to communicate from a character through the use of sound, okay, and it's kind of immersing them in that role of kind of being an active participant and an active spectator. So things like creating drama we're looking at now. So the types of techniques that you may find are things like an allusion, so a reference to a person, a place. You've got biblical references. You've got things which are linked to kind of legends, historical events. Okay. For example, if we refer to Hamlet, for example, you've got in Act 1, Scene 1, upon whose influence Neptune's empire stands, was sick almost to doomsday with eclipse. So here you've got an allusion to Neptune, the Roman god of the sea. Okay. Later on, there's reference in Act 1, Scene 2 to Hyperion, one of the Titans, sort of a superhuman race in Greek mythology. And then you've got where there's this comparison that Hamlet makes in, I think it's Act 1, Scene 2, where he compares his father to Claudius, his father's brother, and he says, "My father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules." So an allusion to Hercules, as we know, a Roman mythological hero, very much known for his immense strength. So you've got the use of the allusions quite prominent through the use through Shakespeare's plays. Biblical allusions that are used as well. We have, and you've got the use of things like Pyrrhus and the second play, and the mousetrap scene, the play within a play, that's used as well. Hecuba as well in Hamlet that's used. You've got proverbs that are used. So where it states, "I, sir, but while the grass grows," the proverb is something musty. So an allusion to a proverb. So the horse starves is what it's looking at. Okay. So there's a lot of different things that could be used when it comes to the use of allusions. Also, we could look at the way in which the playwright, so Shakespeare, structures his writing. So you'll be familiar with the terms of a monologue and a soliloquy. So you've got monologues, which is a long uninterrupted speech that is spoken in the presence of other characters. So unlike a soliloquy, the monologue is heard by other characters. And you've also then got obviously the use of the soliloquy, so a speech in which a character, more often than not, alone on the stage, okay, where they speak their thoughts aloud. Really powerful device, okay, where the writer is able to convey a character's most kind of intimate thoughts with the audience. Shakespeare, for example, uses soliloquies quite liberally, and some of his finest pieces of writing are in this form. For example, the To Be or Not to Be soliloquy you could look at. Okay, Hamlet and Macbeth, possibly two of Shakespeare's most popular plays. They show how Shakespeare develops circumstances and some really powerful scenes to kind of use and implement his soliloquies. Okay, the soliloquies in both Macbeth and Hamlet reveal really deep-rooted conflicts in the minds of two very complex characters in both the title characters of Macbeth and Hamlet. Possibly the best part of Shakespeare's soliloquies is how they do unveil that innermost conflict, okay? And they're so unique, and everything becomes so clear and so vivid as a result of the soliloquies, okay? So when it comes to soliloquy and drama, it provides the audience with kind of the actual thoughts that are sort of lurking inside the mind of a specific character, okay? And we've just discussed the use of irony, and as a playwright, Shakespeare really wanted to develop that aspect of irony in most of his plays, and the soliloquy really played kind of a leading role in bringing in that sense of irony. And what it does is it creates a sense of suspense, really, and it really keeps us as an audience engaged in the next scene. And it also allows for a real connection between us and the character that's delivering the soliloquy, because, as I said, you get access to sort of their deep thoughts and their deep feelings, okay? Then we look at the idea of symbolism. A device or an object or a person or a situation is given sort of meaning beyond this kind of literal level. Often something a bit more abstract, there are two main categories of symbols, so universal symbols and contextual symbols. So have a think about the use of symbolism. You know, it can be created in terms of theatre through aspects such as colour, movement, characters, props, and costumes. So we'll look at Antony and Cleopatra here, okay? So where we see one of the most memorable sort of symbols in the play comes in the final moments as Cleopatra, applies deadly snakes to his skin, and the asps that she uses are kind of a prop in her final and most kind of quite magnificent performance, okay? So there's a purpose to the use of the symbol of the snake here in that particular play, okay? Here what we're looking at is just the different colours that are maybe used in order to show this element of symbolism. So there's quite a long list there. So things like with red, you've got rage, passion, blood, fire, war, violence, okay? Something which is sort of heated, quite possibly. So you'll be quite familiar with this, okay? Sometimes maybe you'd refer to it as the use of colour imagery, but try and think of it in the sort of mindset of symbolism as well, because it could be a symbolic use of colour, especially because we consider it as theatre. And then you've got the pink, the idea of innocence and love. Yellow, where you're looking at the sense of hope and imagination and something which is quite kind of but and what you've got then is the opposite, where you've got things like betrayal and jealousy being shown as well. Orange, you've got the sense of energy and the idea of warmth and vibrance, okay? And then green, you've got the sense of like something which is soothing, and something which is like fresh spring vigour. And we can also look at the idea of immaturity linked to that, okay? Naivety, quite possibly as well. And then with blue, you've got things like faith, spirituality, truth, okay? And then purple or violet, you've got the idea of royalty, possibly look at the idea of ceremony, power, quite possibly. So have a flick through these, have a look, and look at how maybe it could be applied to the characters and the staging that you've looked at in your plays, okay? So we'll look quickly at characterization. So basically the character is the one that kind of, each dramatic character is a function or a need, and the character that function is not a valued character, okay? And essentially it's the character, their words, their ideas, their actions that kind of move and further the plot along, okay? It's a process of producing a character through kind of typifying its actions. It's there to express a certain idea, to contribute to the main idea that the playwright had, the intentions that the playwright had, and you know, it definitely is one that's valued as well, okay? So here we've got an example response, okay, for you to have a look at. Okay, and in this extract response, okay, so we're answering the question that we looked at earlier briefly. So we'll just quickly read through it. So in this extract, Shakespeare presents Hamlet as an intelligent, hostile prince who is in the peak of his madness. He does this in his probing conversation with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, his madness exhibited through his use of prose in his soliloquy, which was typically reserved for characters of lower class or for fools. So some engagement shown there, okay? Firstly, we immediately get the impression at the start of this extract that Hamlet is an extremely perceptive individual who is aware of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's ulterior motives. He claims that there is a kind of confession in your looks. His use of the colloquial kind of. So if we're focusing our ideas here a little bit, okay? So if we look at the idea here where he says the colloquial, okay, and then obviously you've got the kind of, failing to hinder the weight of the accusation which he gives his former friends with the noun confession. So some real sort of focus being shown there, okay? So we get with AO1 this sense of there's quite secure knowledge, okay, and some really quite sound understanding being shown, quite an accurate reading for AO1, okay? And then you've got this quite sound grasp here for AO2, okay, you'd say sound grasp, okay, of implicit meaning, okay. What the candidate is doing here is they're starting to really zoom in. They're starting to really provide this sense of quite close analysis, okay. And this continues where it continues with the use of the verb. So we're looking here, okay. The use of the verb craft conjures the idea of these characters being cunning and sly due to the association with the word crafty. Hence, Hamlet is reputing their futile attempts at being sly. The use of the verb to colour. Okay, so again, you know, really close analysis of the verb to colour could implicate that their intelligence pales to his own, and his apt understanding of their mission to spy on him trumps their efforts to even begin with such a task. So again, AO1, you've got really quite a sound and quite an accurate reading being shown, okay? He then continues, or they then continue with additionally, okay? So there's this developed, well-structured, quite formal argument. So earlier on, we were talking about this sense of an academic register that was needed, okay? So that level of formality that was going to be demanded of this task. And that's where that is, okay? Where this is carefully constructed, thoughtful, sensible argument that's being shown, okay? So additionally, Shakespeare presents Hamlet as a rather manipulative man at this stage of the play, as he uses his status as a prince to exert his superiority over Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, okay? Really perceptive at this point, okay? And then backs that up, all right? He says he orders that they, let me change page. He orders that they, lost my place. He orders that they tell the truth by the obligation of our ever-preserved love. The use of the noun obligation, okay, so again, you got that close focus. Use of the noun obligation demonstrates that he is not permitting his former friends to escape their imminent confession. And the pre-modifying adjective ever preserved perhaps demonstrates his dominance, okay? So again, you've got this close focus, all right? Continues then sort of looking at the idea of the sarcasm that's being used, okay? But a really confident and really quite a thorough reading and thoughtful reading. So when we're thinking of the mark scheme for this, the band that this will be placed into will be just into band 5, okay, just into that top band. So it would be awarded 13 for AO1 out of 15 and 25 for AO2 out of 40, okay. So giving a total mark of 38 out of 45 into that band 5 territory, okay. We're briefly just going to just remind you of some other things that you should be conscious of when it comes to your extract and the type of terminology that you could be using, okay? That answer that we looked at focused on things like use of noun, maybe the sarcastic tone. So these are things that you need to be conscious of as well. So we're going to look at some other literary terms that you may be familiar with since Unit 1 linked to your prose and your drama. So you've got patterns, so repetitions, contrasts and pairs, so motifs, so repeated sets of images, quite possibly, which kind of try and draw your attention to key ideas. You've got the idea of a writer presenting information in a kind of well-structured chronological sequence, whether or not there's any time shifts, quite possibly. So you've got the handling of time, you've got the use of kind of figurative or literal language, a real focus obviously for the extract as well, okay? So is there use of symbolism? We've already touched on that. And then you've got the use of things like personification, metaphor, simile. If it's used though, why is it used, all right? So that's the thing you've got to remember, is using that imagery. If there is imagery there, why is it used? Is it graphic maybe? If there's use of graphic imagery, what impact does it have? So always going back to the question, always ensuring that you look at the impact of the language choices that are being made. So the selection of words in a work, for example. So it could be, you could be looking at the use of semantic fields. So if there's repeated religious phrases or repeated phrases towards nature, you'd look at the semantic field of nature or religion, okay? Active verbs and violence maybe, okay? So that would be looking at the diction choices being made. And then you've got the fictional devices that are being created. So the creation of figures, so the use of character and characterization. So the way in which Shakespeare's created characters to put across a particular message, sometimes political, but definitely there's a message, there's a reading that he wants us as an audience to get from his texts. And then obviously considering the significance of beginnings and endings, and the way important information is sequenced and how it's withheld and how it's revealed, okay? And that's the way in which it's kind of the play's sort of structured, and that's the way the play is kind of put together, okay? So like I said, next week we will be looking at section B, so looking at the drama again, the Shakespeare side, but looking at the essay, the long essay question, the 75 marker one in a bit more depth. So we'll look at a couple of examples, the types of things that would be expected of that as well. So you get a feel of the expectations that the examiner will have when it comes to them marking your paper, okay? So hopefully I'll see you all next week. Thank you very much.